Cowboy, I'm trapped. Release me from the pillory!" An Apache woman's desperate cry. The sun was slowly rising over the wide, dusty plains, painting the horizon with soft shades of orange and pink. In the quiet of early morning, the Apache village stirred to life. Small fires smoked gently outside the huts, and the air smelled of fresh grass and burning wood. Nayeli, a young Apache woman with sharp eyes and a strong spirit, moved carefully through the village. She carried a small woven basket, humming softly to herself as she went to gather fresh herbs and berries for her family. Every step she took seemed purposeful. She knew that in this land, every small action mattered. Nayeli was known in her village for her courage and intelligence. Even as a child, she had been quick to notice the smallest details, whether it was the weather changing or the tracks of an animal passing near the village. Her mother often said she had the eyes of a hawk and the heart of a lion. Nayeli took pride in helping her family and the community. She would often assist her mother in preparing food, gathering water, or teaching the younger children the old stories and lessons of their people. Her life was simple, yet it was full of purpose. The village itself was tucked away at the edge of the plains, surrounded by tall grasses and scattered trees. It was a safe place, for now. The Apache people lived in harmony with nature, understanding the land and its ways. They hunted, farmed, and gathered, always careful to take only what they needed. The elders told stories of their ancestors, of battles fought long ago, and of the wisdom that kept their people alive. Nayeli loved these stories. They made her feel connected to something larger than herself, a chain of courage and knowledge stretching back through generations. Despite the calm and routine of village life, there was an undercurrent of worry. Tales of wandering cowboys and settlers who did not respect the land had reached the village. These outsiders were unpredictable, often bringing trouble and sometimes violence. The elders spoke in hushed tones about staying vigilant and protecting the young and vulnerable. Nayeli listened carefully, understanding that the world beyond the village could be dangerous. Even so, she refused to let fear control her. Life was meant to be lived, and she intended to live it fully. That morning, Nayeli's first task was to visit the small stream that ran near the edge of the village. The stream was her favorite place to gather water and herbs. It was quiet, except for the gentle gurgle of water and the soft rustle of leaves. She knelt by the water, letting the cool liquid flow over her hands, and dipped her basket in the stream to rinse it clean. As she worked, she noticed small tracks along the sandy bank. They looked like animal tracks at first, but Nayeli's sharp eyes told her they were human. She paused, crouching low to observe them. The tracks were fresh, heading in the direction of the village. Her heart gave a small, uneasy leap. Nayeli stood up and looked around. The sun had risen higher, casting golden light over the plains. Everything seemed calm, but the tracks were a warning. She quickly returned to the village, her mind alert. When she reached her mother, she quietly mentioned what she had seen. Her mother frowned, but remained composed. "It may be nothing," she said, "but stay close to the others. We must be careful." Nayeli nodded. She understood the meaning behind her mother's words. Even in times of peace, danger could arrive without warning.
The day continued with the usual chores.
Nayeli helped tend a small garden where the family grew corn and beans, and she carried water from the stream to the huts. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the village, reminding everyone of the joy of life. Nayeli paused occasionally to watch them, smiling softly. She loved the innocence of the children, knowing that their happiness depended on the protection and wisdom of the adults. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just for her family, but for the village as a whole. As the sun climbed higher, a sense of unease began to settle over Nayeli. She could feel it in the way the wind shifted and in the quiet that sometimes fell suddenly, as if the world were holding its breath. She decided to check the perimeter of the village, walking along the edge where the tall grasses grew. She moved silently, listening and watching. Her heart beat steadily, a mix of caution and anticipation. The tracks she had seen earlier had disappeared, but she remained alert. Sometimes danger came silently, like a shadow in the grass. While Naeli walked, she thought about her people and the land. The Apache had always faced challenges, from harsh weather to conflict with outsiders. Yet, they endured. She had heard stories of brave women and men who had protected their villages and families, often at great personal risk. Naeli felt a quiet pride in being part of this legacy. She also understood that courage was not just about fighting. It was about being aware, prepared, and smart in the face of challenges. By mid-afternoon, Naeli returned to her family, carrying her basket filled with herbs and fresh water. The village seemed calm again, and a sense of relief washed over her. She helped her mother prepare the evening meal, chopping vegetables and stirring a pot of stew over the fire. The smells were comforting, reminding her of the safety of home. Even as her mind remained alert, she knew that life could change quickly, and she had to be ready. As evening fell, the village gathered around small fires, sharing stories and songs. Naeli sat quietly, listening to the elders recount tales of the past. Their words painted pictures of bravery, loss, and hope. Naeli's imagination filled in the scenes, and she felt a deep connection to her ancestors. The stories reminded her that even in difficult times, courage and wisdom could guide a person through danger. She resolved to carry that strength with her every day, no matter what challenges might come. Night descended over the plains, bringing a blanket of stars. Naeli looked up at the sky, feeling a mix of wonder and determination. She knew the world outside the village could be unpredictable and danger could appear without warning. Yet she also knew that her spirit, her courage, and her careful attention could help her navigate whatever lay ahead. She whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would face life bravely, protect those she loved, and honor the wisdom of her people. As she settled down to rest, Naeli's thoughts lingered on the tracks she had seen earlier. Though the day had passed without incident, she remained aware that the world beyond the village was not always safe. She closed her eyes, listening to the soft sounds of the night, the whispering wind, the distant howl of a coyote, the gentle rustle of leaves. Life in the Apache village was fragile but beautiful, and she was determined to live it fully, with courage and careful attention to the world around her. In those quiet moments before sleep, Naeli felt both the weight and the power of her heritage. She was a young woman of her people, tied to the land, the stories, and the courage that had been passed down through generations. Her life was simple, yet it carried significance. Every action, every choice was part of a larger story. Naeli did not yet know what challenges awaited her, but she felt ready. Her spirit was strong, her mind sharp, and her heart full of courage. She would face whatever came, with the wisdom of her ancestors and the determination to survive and protect those she loved. And so, the first day of her story ended quietly, with a promise of more to come. The sun had set, the fires flickered gently, and Naeli rested, unaware of the events that would soon test her courage and strength in ways she had never imagined. The world beyond her village waited, unpredictable and dangerous, but Naeli's spirit was ready for the journey ahead. The next morning the village awoke to the soft glow of dawn, just as it always did. Birds chirped, and a gentle breeze whispered through the tall grasses surrounding the small Apache settlement. Naeli rose early, just as she always did, and began her usual chores. Her heart still carried the quiet unease from the tracks she had seen yesterday, but she reminded herself that the day could pass without trouble. She carried her basket and walked to the stream, humming softly to herself as she had the day before. The water was cool and clear, and she knelt to fill her basket, letting the liquid flow through her fingers. Everything seemed calm, almost ordinary, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. But calm can be deceptive. From the horizon, the sound of hooves reached her ears, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Nayeli's sharp eyes scanned the distant plains. A small group of riders was approaching, moving faster than ordinary travelers. She recognized them immediately. Not traders, not travelers, but cowboys. Their presence made her heart pound. Stories of cowboys who caused trouble in nearby settlements had reached her village before, but she had never faced them directly. She straightened up, holding her basket tightly, and considered her options. There was little time to think. Nayeli ran back toward the village, her feet barely touching the ground. The cowboys were riding with purpose, their voices carrying over the plain. As she reached the first huts, she shouted warnings to the others. "Strangers are coming! Cowboys are near!" Her voice was clear and urgent, echoing across the village. The villagers stirred quickly, some grabbing tools for protection while others guided children to the center of the village. The elders began speaking quickly, making plans to hide the young and vulnerable. Nayeli's mother pulled her close and whispered, "Stay near me. Do not wander. Be careful." Nayeli nodded, her mind racing. But the cowboys moved faster than anyone expected. They did not approach peacefully. They were reckless and loud, shouting commands and laughing roughly. Nayeli could see their intentions immediately. These men did not come for trade or conversation. They came for control, for mischief, for power. The villagers tried to protect themselves, forming small groups and shouting warnings, but the cowboys ignored them. Nayeli felt a wave of fear, but she refused to let it paralyze her. She was determined to stay calm and think clearly. As the cowboys entered the village, Nayeli saw them grab one of the younger men who had tried to confront them. He struggled, but there were too many, and the men were too strong. Nayeli's heart ached as she watched. She realized that she could not fight them directly, but she could try to protect herself. She darted behind a small hut, hoping to avoid notice. Her mind worked quickly. If she could remain calm and clever, she might find a way to survive. Suddenly, one of the cowboys spotted her. He was tall and broad, with a rough, sunburned face and a cruel glint in his eye. "Hey, you there!" he shouted, pointing directly at her. Nayeli froze for a moment, then turned and ran, weaving between huts and dodging debris. Her heart pounded, but her legs carried her swiftly. She had learned long ago that the land could be an ally if one moved carefully and with purpose. She knew the small paths and hidden corners of the village better than anyone, and she used that knowledge now. Despite her efforts, the cowboys were relentless. The tall man and another rider caught up to her near the edge of the village. They grabbed her roughly, ignoring her protests. Nayeli struggled with all her strength, kicking and pulling, but their grip was firm. Fear surged through her, but beneath it was a spark of determination. She refused to give in quietly. "Let me go," she cried, her voice strong and full of life. "I am not yours to take." The cowboys laughed at her defiance, their amusement cruel and mocking. They tied her hands with rough rope, binding them tightly. Nayeli winced but refused to show the depth of her pain. She knew that panic could make her weaker, and she would need her strength later. One of the cowboys shouted something to the others, and soon she was surrounded by more men. They pushed her onto a horse roughly, causing her to stumble before she regained her balance. The ride away from the village was rough, the horses' movements jostling her as the cowboys laughed and shouted. Naeli held on tightly, her mind racing with fear, anger, and determination. During the ride, Naeli tried to take note of the landscape. She memorized the turns and landmarks, hoping that if she found a chance to escape, she could navigate her way back. Her mind worked quickly, calculating possibilities, studying the cowboys' behavior, and looking for weaknesses. Even in the midst of danger, her intelligence and awareness shone. She noticed that the cowboys were not paying close attention to the sides of the trail. They assumed she could not escape. That small observation gave her a glimmer of hope. By late afternoon, the group reached a small town nearby. Naeli was forced off the horse and made to kneel in the center of the town square. A wooden structure awaited her, a pillory. It was a harsh, humiliating device, meant to restrain and punish. Naeli's heart sank as she was locked into it, her hands secured in the holes of the wooden frame. She struggled briefly, but it was impossible to break free without help. The cowboys laughed and jeered, drawing attention from curious townspeople. Naeli felt a surge of helplessness, but she refused to give up. Her voice rang out across the square. "Cowboy, I am trapped. Release me from this pillory." Her cry was both desperate and brave. Some townspeople turned away, pretending not to see. Others watched silently, unsure of how to respond. Naeli's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who might offer help. She realized that her survival depended not just on physical strength, but on courage, intelligence, and the hope that someone would recognize her humanity. As the sun began to set, the pillory cast a long shadow across the dusty square. Naeli endured the uncomfortable position, her muscles aching, but she remained alert. She observed the cowboys' habits, noting which ones were careless, which ones argued among themselves, and which ones seemed slightly sympathetic. Every small detail could become an advantage. Despite the humiliation and fear, Naeli refused to let despair take hold. She whispered quietly to herself, repeating the lessons her ancestors had taught her. Courage, patience, and cleverness could overcome even the most dire circumstances. The townspeople's curiosity gradually waned, but Naeli did not stop thinking. She used the stillness to plan, imagining ways to escape, ways to turn her situation to her favor. The cowboys assumed she was powerless, but Naeli's mind was sharp and alert. She considered the ropes, the position of the keys, and the routines of the men around her. Every observation was a piece of a puzzle, a small step toward freedom. Night fell, and the square emptied, leaving Naeli alone with the cowboys. The wooden pillory creaked as she shifted her weight slightly, careful not to draw too much attention. She thought of her village, her family, and the quiet plains she loved. The memory of home strengthened her resolve. She knew that she could survive this. She had survived before, in small ways, through cleverness and attention. Now she would need to survive in a larger, more dangerous way. Throughout the night, Naeli endured discomfort and humiliation, but her spirit remained unbroken. She whispered quietly to herself stories of bravery from her people, imagining herself as a hero in those tales. The pain and fear were real, but they could not take away her courage. She promised herself that she would find a way to escape, to return to her family, and to turn this experience into a story of resilience and cleverness. By the time dawn approached, Naeli's plan was beginning to take shape. She had studied the cowboys' habits, learned their weaknesses, and observed the routines of the few townspeople who might be sympathetic. Her mind was sharp despite the exhaustion. She realized that escape was not guaranteed, but opportunity existed. She had survived this far through intelligence, calmness, and courage, and she would continue to rely on those qualities. As the first light of morning touched the square, Naeli took a deep breath. She looked around, feeling a mix of fear, determination, and hope. She was trapped, yes, but not defeated. Her voice, which had cried out for help the previous day, now whispered quietly to herself, "I will not give up. I will survive. I will return home." Her mind worked like a silent river, planning and calculating the next steps. Naeli knew that her courage and intelligence were her greatest allies, and she clung to that knowledge as tightly as she held the ropes of the pillory. The stage was set for the next chapter of her life, one that would test her bravery, cleverness, and endurance in ways she could not yet fully imagine. Naeli's journey had moved from the quiet safety of her village into the dangerous and unpredictable world beyond. The cowboys thought they had control, but they had underestimated her spirit. Naeli's heart was determined, her mind was sharp, and her courage was unwavering. Though trapped, she was far from defeated, and the story of her survival had only just begun. The morning sun spilled across the small town square, casting long shadows from the wooden pillory where Naeli had been trapped through the night. Her muscles ached, her hands were raw, and her back throbbed from leaning against the rough wood. Yet, despite the pain and humiliation, her spirit remained unbroken. Naeli had learned something important the previous day. Fear could not control her. Only careful thought, patience, and courage could guide her through danger. She had endured, observed, and now she began to plan. As the cowboys stirred, laughing and stretching, Naeli took careful notice of their movements. They seemed careless after a night of revelry, some yawning and scratching their heads, others arguing quietly about the previous day's events. Their arrogance was her advantage. They believed that once a person was trapped in the pillory, resistance ended. They underestimated her. But Naeli knew she had to rely on more than strength. She needed her mind. Every small detail, the sound of the hinges, the timing of their movements, the rhythm of their work, became a piece of her strategy. Naeli's first concern was survival. Being locked in the pillory was uncomfortable and exposed her to the elements. The sun rose higher, beating down on her back, and dust swirled around her feet. She shifted her weight carefully, trying to reduce the pain in her wrists. She remembered the stories her mother had told her about endurance, how the Apache people survived long journeys, harsh weather, and hunger by staying calm and thinking clearly. Naeli reminded herself that suffering could be endured if she remained clever and aware. She noticed the townspeople were beginning to gather, some out of curiosity, some out of sympathy. A few elderly women and children watched quietly from the edges of the square. Naeli understood that public attention could be dangerous, but it could also be useful. People who cared, even a little, might help if given the right opportunity. She began speaking softly, calling out to those who lingered, not demanding assistance, but planting seeds of trust and appeal. Her voice, though muffled by the pillory, carried determination. She spoke about fairness, about kindness, and about how cruelty did not bring respect. Her words were simple but powerful, and she noticed a few eyes soften as they listened. Inside her mind, Naeli ran through possibilities. The ropes binding her hands were thick, but not impossible to manipulate if the right tools or opportunity appeared. The key to the pillory was always near the cowboys, sometimes carried loosely in a pocket or left unattended briefly. Naeli studied their habits. One of the cowboys, a tall man with sunburned cheeks, frequently walked to a nearby tavern, leaving the key hanging on his belt. Another often bent down to adjust the horses' saddles near the edge of the square. Naeli memorized every detail. Patience was her ally. She knew she had to wait for the perfect moment. Hours passed, and the heat of the day grew stronger. Naeli endured the discomfort silently, moving slightly when necessary to avoid stiffness or injury. She whispered softly to herself, repeating old lessons. Observe. Think. Wait. Act. Her training in awareness, learned from the quiet life of her village, had prepared her for moments like this. Each passing hour brought her closer to understanding the cowboy's routine and weaknesses. Even as the sun reached its peak, her focus never wavered. By mid-afternoon, Naeli's opportunity began to take shape. The cowboy who carried the key walked away to deal with some task, leaving the pillory briefly unattended. Naeli's sharp eyes noticed it immediately. Her mind raced as she imagined how she could reach the key without drawing attention. The square was mostly empty now, with only a few townspeople observing from a distance. Naeli adjusted her position slightly, testing her reach. The ropes were tight, but not immovable. Her fingers brushed the edge of the key's hook. One careful movement, and it might be within her grasp. But Naeli also knew she had to be cautious. Acting too quickly could bring disaster. The cowboys returned unpredictably, and she could not afford to be caught mid-motion. She waited, breathing steadily, counting silently in her mind. Patience was difficult, but she knew it was essential. Each second she waited was an opportunity to observe, to understand, and to prepare for success. Her mind was alive with possibilities, running through every scenario and every potential outcome. Finally, the moment arrived. The cowboy walked away again, distracted by a minor argument with another man. Naeli shifted carefully, stretching her fingers toward the key. Her heart beat steadily, a mix of fear and determination. She gritted her teeth and inched her hand forward, feeling the smooth metal under her fingertips. One careful tug, and the key slipped free. Naeli hid it under the folds of her skirt, keeping it out of sight. Relief surged through her, but she did not allow herself to relax. The hardest part of her plan had yet to come, escaping without being caught. Naeli observed the layout of the square, the position of the cowboys, and the distance to the nearest hiding place. She noticed a stack of barrels near a building's corner. If she could free her hands quietly and slip toward that shadow, she might gain cover. Slowly, she worked the ropes, using the key to loosen the knots. Her fingers moved deftly, careful not to make a sound. Every small movement had to be precise, and her concentration never faltered. Hours of observation and patience had brought her to this critical moment, and she would not fail. With her hands finally free, Naeli waited again, letting her eyes sweep the square to ensure no one was watching too closely. The shadows of the late afternoon sun grew longer, providing more concealment. She rose slightly, testing her balance, then slipped silently toward the barrels. The rough wood pressed against her palms, but she ignored the discomfort. Her focus was total. Each step was measured, quiet, and careful. The cowboy's attention was elsewhere, and Naeli's heart filled with cautious hope. She crouched behind the barrels, her breathing steady. The town square was quiet, save for the occasional shout of a distant worker or the clatter of a horse's hoof. Naeli felt the first real sense of freedom she had experienced since the cowboys had captured her. Her mind, however, remained alert. She knew that any sudden movement or misstep could result in immediate recapture. Every detail mattered. The timing of the cowboy's steps, the position of townspeople, the flow of wind carrying her scent. Survival required full awareness, and Naeli's senses were alive and sharp. As she prepared for the next move, Naeli noticed a sympathetic townsman lingering near the edge of the square. He did not intervene openly, but his eyes betrayed concern. Naeli nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of potential help. She did not yet need it, but knowing someone might assist if needed gave her courage. Her plan was to move carefully toward the outskirts of town, using shadows and buildings as cover, and then disappear into the hills and plains she knew so well. Her heart raced with determination. Freedom was close, but caution was still essential. The cowboys, oblivious to her subtle movements, continued their careless routines. Naeli used this to her advantage. She shifted slightly, testing the path to the edge of the square. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and quiet. When a cowboy turned his back to fetch another tool, Naeli took a small step, then another, blending with the shadows. She whispered softly to herself, reminding herself of her training: patience, courage, and cleverness. She would not allow fear to control her actions. Slowly, steadily, Naeli made her way past the last visible threats. She reached the edge of the square, the buildings providing cover. Her muscles ached, her back throbbed, but she did not stop. The plains beyond the town called to her, promising safety and the chance to return home. Naeli paused for a moment, listening carefully for any sounds of pursuit. The wind was her ally, carrying her scent away from the town. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, noting the safest path to disappear into the wilderness. Finally, Naeli slipped out of the town square entirely, moving into the narrow paths between buildings. She felt a surge of triumph, but did not celebrate yet. Every step could still be dangerous. The cowboys might realize her absence at any moment. She kept low, moving swiftly and silently. The sympathetic townsmen watched her from a distance, remaining discreet but alert. Naeli felt gratitude, but she focused on the immediate task: survival. By the time she reached the outskirts of the town, Naeli felt a sense of cautious relief. The hills and plains stretched before her, familiar and protective. She paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the wind on her face. Freedom was almost within reach, but she knew she could not stop until she was safely back in the wilderness. Her courage, patience, and intelligence had guided her this far, and she would rely on them to reach home. Naeli moved into the shadowed hills, blending with the tall grasses. Her heart still raced, but she was in control of her movements. The town and the Pillory were behind her, and the wide plains of home lay ahead. Every step brought her closer to safety, every careful movement a testament to her cleverness and determination. She whispered quietly to herself, a promise that she would survive, return home, and use this experience to grow stronger. By the time night began to fall, Naeli had disappeared completely into the hills. The lights of the town twinkled faintly in the distance, but she was free from immediate danger. She paused on a small rise, looking out at the vast landscape, feeling the cool evening wind on her face. Her muscles ached, her body was exhausted, but her spirit was triumphant. She had endured capture, humiliation, and danger, and she had not broken. Naeli's journey was far from over, but she had taken the most critical steps toward survival and freedom. The hills stretched out before Naeli like a quiet sea of grass and shadow. Her muscles ached from the long day, but adrenaline and determination kept her moving. She knew the cowboys would soon realize she had escaped, and they would search for her. Every step counted now. The plains were both her challenge and her ally. She had grown up learning the ways of the land, how to read the tracks of animals, where water flowed, and how to hide in plain sight. These lessons, once simple parts of daily life, were now vital to her survival. Naeli paused at the crest of a small rise. letting herself catch her breath. She looked back toward the town, the lights faint against the early evening sky. The pillory, the laughter of the cowboys, and the crowded square were behind her, but she knew danger was far from gone. Every sound could be a warning. She listened carefully. The rustle of leaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft steps of creatures moving through the grass. She moved slowly, blending with the shadows and using the land to her advantage. Her mind raced with possibilities. Should she head toward the river to the west, where the water and trees could provide cover? Or should she follow the ridgelines, which offered a high vantage point but left her exposed to the open plains? Nayeli weighed her options quickly, relying on the instincts honed from years in her village. She chose the ridgelines, reasoning that if the cowboys tried to track her immediately, higher ground would allow her to see them coming first. Every decision now could mean the difference between freedom and capture. As she moved along the ridge, Nayeli recalled the few lessons her elders had taught her about encounters with outsiders. Always be aware of your surroundings, never underestimate your opponent, and use what you know to your advantage. She adjusted her pace, walking softly to avoid snapping twigs or stirring loose stones. Her breathing was controlled, slow and deliberate. She had learned that panic could betray even the cleverest mind. Nayeli's focus was sharp. Her senses were alert to every detail of the land around her. Hours passed and the sun dipped lower, turning the sky into shades of gold and purple. The cowboys had likely started searching by now, but Nayeli trusted her instincts. She used small depressions in the hills to hide when necessary, lying flat and motionless for moments that felt like hours. Her mind remained active, cataloging the paths she had taken, noting landmarks and considering escape routes if pursuit grew closer. She was learning that freedom required more than speed. It required patience, awareness, and careful planning. As darkness began to fall, Nayeli faced a small challenge. A narrow valley with a trickling creek. Crossing it would leave her momentarily exposed, but it also offered the reward of water and the cover of the tree line beyond. She approached cautiously, scanning the area from a distance. The creek reflected the dying light, glittering like scattered silver. Nayeli moved closer, keeping to the shadows, careful not to disturb the rocks along the bank. She paused often, listening for footsteps or voices, her heart racing with tension. Finally, she reached the creek. She knelt and drank quickly, letting the cool water soothe her dry throat. She washed some of the dust and sweat from her face, feeling renewed, though still wary. The trees on the far side of the creek promised better cover. Nayeli carefully tested the footing, stepping from rock to avoid splashing water. Her small movements were deliberate, careful, and silent. She reached the far bank without incident, her heart beating steadily, but her mind alert for any sudden danger. The tree line provided both concealment and a sense of hope. Nayeli moved deeper into the shadows, brushing against leaves and branches, careful to avoid making sound. She paused at intervals to catch her breath and listen. The wind carried the distant echoes of the town and perhaps the search of the cowboys, though she could not be certain. She reminded herself of the lessons from her village. Trust your senses, rely on what you know, and move with patience. Every careful step kept her closer to home. As night fell completely, Nayeli decided to rest briefly. She found a small hollow beneath a tree, sheltered from wind and prying eyes. Her body was exhausted, but she kept her mind alert. She could hear the distant cries of animals and the soft murmur of the creek. In the stillness, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on what she had endured. Captured, humiliated, and restrained, she had survived by staying calm, observant, and patient. Her courage had carried her this far, and she knew it would carry her further. Sleep came in short bursts, and Nayeli awoke several times to listen to the sounds of the night. Each time she adjusted her position, keeping hidden from potential threats. By the faint light of dawn, she was ready to move again. The ridge lines beyond the tree line promised safer passage and a clearer view of the plains. Nayeli moved with the cautious confidence of someone who had survived much and was determined not to falter now. Morning brought new challenges. The landscape opened into wider plains, and concealment became more difficult. Nayeli slowed her pace, keeping low and using small dips in the land for cover. She remembered the lessons her elders had taught her. Always think ahead, always watch for signs of others, and use the natural world to your advantage. She scanned the horizon, noting the patterns of the wind and clouds, and kept a sharp eye on any distant movement. Hours later, she spotted a familiar landmark, a large rock formation near the edge of the plains that marked the path to her village. A surge of hope ran through her. She adjusted her course slightly to avoid being seen from a distance, knowing that cowboys could travel quickly and might still be searching. Every movement was calculated. Nayeli felt the tension of the past days pressing on her, but her determination grew stronger. She had endured capture, humiliation, and danger, and she would endure this final stretch as well. Along the way, Nayeli found tracks in the soft earth, some familiar, others not. She followed only what she knew to be safe paths and avoided any tracks that might betray her location. Her instincts guided her like a quiet compass, honed from years of observing the land. By late afternoon, she had crossed several small streams and navigated rocky terrain, all while staying alert for signs of pursuit. Her muscles ached, but her spirit never wavered. As the sun began to dip again, Nayeli approached a small grove of trees. She paused at the edge, scanning the horizon. The distant town was far behind her, but she could sense that the cowboy's search would continue. She needed to move carefully now, using the grove to rest and conceal herself while planning the final approach to the safety of her village. Every step from this point was critical. She took a deep breath, feeling both fear and excitement. Freedom was almost within reach, but only careful action could bring her safely home. Nayeli rested briefly among the trees, listening to the whispers of the wind and the soft sounds of wildlife. She reflected on what she had learned, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Her mind remained sharp, cataloging every detail of the landscape and plotting the safest path forward. The journey had tested her patience, endurance, and cleverness, and she had passed each trial. The lessons of her people, combined with her own intelligence and bravery, had guided her this far. By nightfall, Nayeli set out again, moving carefully through the shadows. The village was now within her reach, though still hidden by distance and terrain. She followed a familiar ridgeline that would take her to the outskirts of the settlement. Her heart beat steadily, a mixture of excitement and cautious relief. She knew the final moments of the journey were often the most dangerous, and she remained alert, scanning for any signs of danger. Finally, as the moon rose high, Nayeli reached the familiar outskirts of her village. The sight of the huts, the fields, and the gentle glow of firelight filled her with relief and joy. She paused briefly, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of home. The journey had been long, exhausting, and dangerous, but she had survived. Her courage, intelligence, and determination had carried her through. She moved carefully, staying hidden until she reached the safety of the village boundary. At last, Nayeli stepped into the quiet embrace of her community. Her family and neighbors who had feared the worst rushed to meet her. There were tears of relief, embraces, and quiet murmurs of gratitude. Nayeli's ordeal had ended, but the lessons she carried and the courage she had shown would not be forgotten. She had escaped the cowboys, survived the pillory, and returned home stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. That night, as she lay beneath the familiar stars, Nayeli reflected on her journey. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet she had prevailed. Her story was one of patience, intelligence, and courage, a testament to her people's strength and the enduring spirit of survival. She knew that she would carry these lessons with her for the rest of her life, and that her voice, though once silenced by the pillory, would now speak with strength and wisdom. The first light of dawn painted the sky with soft pinks and golds as Nayeli stood at the edge of her village. Her journey had been long, exhausting, and full of danger, but she had made it home. The familiar sights of the huts, the small gardens, and the smoke curling from chimneys filled her with a sense of relief she had never felt before. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not only for her own survival but for the strength of the community that had supported her, even from afar. She took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, letting it fill her lungs, and allowed herself a small smile. Word of her return spread quickly. Children ran ahead, laughing and shouting her name, while elders emerged from their homes with expressions of awe and relief. Nayeli's mother rushed to her side, embracing her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You are safe," she whispered, pressing her face against Nayeli's shoulder. Nayeli hugged her back, overwhelmed by the warmth and love of her family. All the fear, pain, and humiliation she had endured in the hands of the cowboys felt distant now, replaced by the joy of being home. But Nayeli knew she could not simply return to life as it had been. The experiences she had faced had changed her, teaching her lessons about courage, patience, and the unpredictable nature of the world. She looked around at her people, the friends, family, and neighbors who had been her community for as long as she could remember, and felt a deep sense of responsibility. Her survival was not just a personal triumph, it was a story that could teach others about resilience, resourcefulness, and the strength of the human spirit. The elders called a gathering in the center of the village. Nayeli, still weary, agreed to speak, knowing that her story could inspire and warn her people. She recounted the events carefully, describing the cowboys, the pillory, and the lessons she had learned about patience and observation. She did not dwell on fear or despair, but on the strategies that had kept her alive and the courage that had carried her through the darkest moments. The villagers listened intently, hanging on her every word, their eyes wide with respect and admiration. Her story became a lesson for everyone. Nayeli explained how careful observation, patience, and intelligence had helped her escape when strength alone would not have been enough. She spoke about the importance of remaining calm under pressure, using knowledge of the land to one's advantage, and relying on the support of even the smallest allies. Children listened with rapt attention, imagining themselves in her place, while adults nodded quietly, understanding that courage often came in quiet, thoughtful actions, rather than loud displays of power. As the days passed, Nayeli returned to her daily routines, but she carried the memories of her ordeal with her. She helped her mother with the garden, collected water from the stream, and taught the children stories of their ancestors, now adding her own experiences to the lessons. Every action, no matter how small, reminded her of the importance of courage, awareness, and the strength of community. She was no longer just a young woman of the village. She had become a symbol of endurance and wisdom, someone whose story could guide others in times of uncertainty. One evening, Nayeli sat by the edge of the village, looking out over the plains she loved. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of orange and purple. She thought about the cowboys, the pillory, and the long journey that had brought her home. The fear she had felt seemed distant now, but she remembered it clearly, knowing that it had been a teacher as much as a challenge. She whispered to herself, "I survived. I am stronger, and I will use this strength to protect those I love." The stars began to appear, one by one, each a reminder of the vast, beautiful world beyond the village, full of both danger and promise. In the following weeks, Naeli noticed changes in the way people treated her. Children approached her with admiration, asking her questions about her experiences and how she had remained calm. Adults sought her advice on various matters, valuing her perspective and the lessons she had learned through adversity. Even the elders, who had always respected her, now looked at her with a new kind of reverence. Naeli had become more than a survivor. She had become a teacher, a guide, and a source of inspiration for her entire community. Despite the admiration, Naeli remained humble. She knew that her story was not just about her own bravery, but about the lessons of patience, observation, and courage that her ancestors had taught her. She made sure to credit the wisdom of her people, the strength of her family, and the support of even the quietest allies who had watched from afar. Her story became a shared experience, a lesson in resilience that belonged not only to her, but to the entire village. One day Naeli walked to the edge of the stream, reflecting on the journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty. She saw the water flowing gently, the same stream where she had first noticed the cowboys approach. The memory of that moment no longer filled her with dread. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come. She had survived capture, humiliation, and the uncertainty of the world outside her village. She had used her mind, her courage, and her awareness to reclaim her freedom, and now she could use her experiences to guide others, ensuring that knowledge and wisdom continued to flow through her community like the water in the stream. Naeli began teaching the younger women and men of the village, sharing the lessons of survival, courage, and cleverness. She demonstrated how to observe quietly, think strategically, and remain patient in dangerous situations. She encouraged them to respect the land and each other, emphasizing that strength alone was not enough. Wisdom and courage were equally important. Her teachings became a cornerstone of the village's knowledge, ensuring that future generations would carry forward the lessons she had learned. Time passed, and life in the village slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Yet, the story of Naeli's ordeal remained vivid, passed from one villager to another in whispers, songs, and shared memories. Parents told their children about the young woman who had faced danger with courage and cleverness. The village itself seemed stronger for having witnessed her journey. Naeli, now both teacher and survivor, became a symbol of hope, a living reminder that even in the face of cruelty and uncertainty, the human spirit could endure and triumph. One quiet evening, Naeli sat by the fire with her mother and the elders. They spoke of the past, of hardships faced and overcome, and of the lessons that would guide them in the future. Naeli felt a deep sense of belonging and purpose. She had returned not just with her life intact, but with wisdom, courage, and the strength to inspire her people. Her journey had transformed her from a young woman of the village into a leader in her own right, someone whose voice and example would endure for years to come. As night fell and stars filled the sky, Naeli looked out over the plains she had crossed in fear and determination. She thought about the cowboys, the pillory, and the long journey that had tested her in every way. The memories were strong, but they no longer frightened her. Instead, they reminded her of her strength, resilience, and cleverness. She whispered quietly to herself, "I faced fear. I endured. I returned home, and I will carry these lessons forever." The wind rustled through the grasses as if echoing her words, and Nayeli felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. In the weeks and months that followed, Nayeli continued to live her life with courage and wisdom.